Outlook forum that will be coming up. You can see on the screens in front of you the agenda, introducing the new committee immediate members. Okay, it's over, so forget that. We'll come back to that in a second. We're going to do a little bit about the forum and forecast procedures, and then we're going to move on to looking at economic update. And there are some definite slides in there to get input from you. It's not supposed to be just me talking or and then lastly, we have a half an hour reserved at the end for some additional networking and some committee discussions. Some committees are more prone to do this than others. So we'll see how that goes, but just moving along. So first, I'd like to ask the new committee members well, I should show you. Here are the committee chairs for each of the committees. And some of the new people may not know which committee they're on. Don't worry about that. But if you do, that's great when you get up. But these are the individual committee chairs. And we'll be sharing this PowerPoint with you. So we could have that to work with as we go along. So again, before I go to committee work, do we want to go around the room and do the committee chair, the new committee members at this point? So I don't know who all the new committee members are, but Brian in the back of the room is going to.
Let's just start on that side. If you're new, just stand up and introduce yourself and tell us which organization you're with.
I'm Bill Craighead. I'm the new director of the UCCF Economic Forum.
And I'm Lee Sandwich. I'm also in Florida. Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Rose. I'm with OED and I'm the new international trade.
Hello, I'm Troy Sedelius. I'm an executive vice president with the Buckner Company. We are property and casualty insurance brokers.
I'm Patricia Wells. I'm the director of communications for Colorado Bankers Association.
I'm Michaela O'Malley. I'm with OED.
Here. It's over here. Oh, right here.
Hi, I'm Dennis Covell. I am a research economist for the Berkeley University.
You're not really with him, but
Okay. Hi, I'm Pam Riker. I'm here for representing Lori Jackson in Denver International Airport.
All right, so that's exciting. New people, and thank you for participating. This slide gives you the concept of the committee work. Today, September 11th, we're having our kickoff meetings. And then between September 11th and early November, you have time to have your individual committee meetings. And if needed, Brian has helped facilitate some of those in terms of some people who might want to come in. The lunches are in the back there. Brian has helped facilitate some of those meetings for groups and actually participated in a number of them over time. Important to realize we need the final reports from you in the beginning of November. I do realize there's always an election in November, so we fully realize that. That said, this is not, at least in my mind, a major election, so I'm not as sort of worried about the ballot issues. Maybe you are, but we can sort of talk about that as we go along. We will be reviewing the individual reports, the staff and the students at the BRD, and we'll be getting back to you for feedback or questions that we have about what's in your report, and we're hopefully doing that within a week or so in November. We have a deadline of November 15th for sending the booklet to the printer. So again, especially for the new folks, we print a booklet that looks like this. It's 100 and, in this case, 40 pages long. And we produce a number of those that we distribute at the Outlook, actually physically print and distribute at the Outlook. but we put a PDF up on the website that gets a lot of access from people in the state and around the country. So we would, again, encourage you, and your names will be in that, and information is in the booklet, in the back of the booklet. So again, thank you for your help and keeping us on the timeline. And then at this time, we have officially contracted with the Grand Hyatt again to have the Outlook Forum on Monday, December 4th. We just toured earlier. We just toured the Grand Hyatt and met with them, and it looks like the room arrangements are going to be even better this year. For those of you who have been long-term participants, we've always been there with this wonderful group of industrial manufacturing people from the Midwest, and they are as nice as people you could ever be with, but they're also in this sort of tangential space right next to us. And their event, for the first time in at least a decade, is a week later than ours. So we actually have better access to the space this year, but we won't have those nice Midwestern people to talk to. So it's okay. We've never been able to effectively get them to come into the Outlook, but it's okay. So with that, we have a little bit of background on the process. So with forecast instructions, of course, we're trying to leverage your expertise, and we certainly want in the report a reflection on what you think happened in your sector in 2023, and discussing the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats as you see them for 2024. And with that, we really ask, especially, some of you quote things regularly in your write-ups, please cite your sources so we are not doing any sort of copyright violation. If you have Chat GPT do this for you, let us know that. Please don't. Please don't do that. Not please don't let us know. So we'll have more about that. And we have an instructions list. We can share that with you in terms of the things you might be looking at. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, out of sync a little bit, but here's the support you can expect from the BRD, setting up meetings, whether they are in person or on Zoom for your committees. You have a copy, you will receive a copy of last year's report as it was written. You have or will get model-driven forecasts that look a little bit like what you see on the right-hand side for employment, with a high, a low, and sort of a baseline forecast, if you will. So giving you a little bit of structural parameters for the employment number, at least. You will have charts and tables, including all the data that we have. You will have some additional research that we have found along the way, and we will provide that. We provide the photos. We also do some additional research if we think there's a hole or whatever, but we wind up getting the photos for your section. And please let us know if you need any additional committee members. That's a very important part. We've added several people. We've been trying to do that when committees have said we could use somebody in a specific area, like casualty insurance, whatever that might be. We have tried to go out and find people to round out the committees. So thank you so much for that. So with that bit of background, what we typically do here is go through a forecast kind of setup with what we're seeing as sort of a background forecast for you to work with. And intentionally, there are slides put in along the way here to get you to comment or give us your thoughts on this. What we're saying is not necessarily right. It's our best guess in a world of, as you know, I shouldn't say guess, but it's our best thoughts on the subject in a world of high uncertainty. So we are more than willing to hear and would like to hear your thoughts, if they diverge a lot from our thoughts, particularly maybe even more useful on the topic. So as you know, we've had a number, this is a background slide many of you saw last year in terms of coming off one of the shortest recessions ever. But just reminding people, since it seems to be top of mind, are we having a soft landing? Are we having a hard landing, a recession? When we went into the forecast last year, our point was we didn't know which of these things it was going to be. In our view, it was going to be either a slow economy or potentially a very weak recession. But in terms of growth of GDP, it wasn't going to make much difference. I think you could argue, after I just put this up here, just a reminder of the things that are in recessions: personal income, non-farm payroll employment, employment as measured by the household survey, consumption. So these are the things that are actually technically in the definition of a recession, just as a sort of a brief reminder of what recessions are. But the state of all of that is, when you look at these indicators, they've been mixed. And a number of these things have, I think, outperformed what many people had expected. Employment certainly has been stronger. It was stronger in the first half of the year in particular. GDP continues to outperform expectations. And you can see some of these other things: confidence surveys, consumption, and so on. I'm going to talk more about these, and hopefully you're going to contribute about some of these things as we go through this sort of presentation. So as a fundamental backdrop, you can't be really talking about forecasting the Colorado economy or any other sort of state economy without a grounding in where you think the national economy is. And right now, through Q2, the U.S. economy year over year is at 2.5% GDP. I would say that's a tad higher than people had thought it would be going into the year. But you can see on the right, we have here optimistic baseline and pessimistic sort of forecasts for GDP. But you can see down below on the right, Moody's is suggesting it's going to be at 2% this year and 1.3% next year. Consensus forecast, which we also subscribe to at this point, is 1.9% for this year, and 2024 is 0.6%. And there are a number of these, and I'm sure some of you are reading some of these from different providers that are out there. There are a number of people who think growth has been a little bit more accelerated this year, and some of those forecasters are suggesting that that is going to increase the probability of an extremely weak first half of 2024. So in a number that I consider to be a little bit scary, I looked up the Atlanta Federal Reserve now forecast for GDP. So some of you, I'm sure, are well aware of the concept of nowcasts, but they basically, they say it's not a forecast. It's just how the data are running for this period of time. So we're sitting here at the beginning of the second week of September. This third quarter ends on September 30th. And as of their most recent reading, it's running 6% GDP growth for the third quarter, which to me, looking at what I see, makes almost no sense. So correct me where I go wrong here. So with that, you know, what are you seeing and what are you thinking just based on the business that you're in or when you're out there? And I know a number of you actually follow this more closely. So I'd love to have some input on what you're seeing or what you think you're going to see going forward, or what people around you are saying. I don't know who wants to go first. I don't want to do cold calling, but I do in class. Ryan, Kate, Ron, anybody? John.
I'll stick my neck out first. This is coming from the perspective of making business investment decisions, the big bucks. And accordingly, timing really doesn't matter. What's the long-term trend? If a project's gonna last 30 years, I have to survive through up and down. Is there a trend and continuing to go up to maybe extended enough to want to put the big bucks into an investment project? From that perspective, I see GDP continually in that band that you showed earlier, but working its way up, and that gives me some confidence as to where I wanna invest money.
Do you think that view is more unique to the energy sector since people in the room don't necessarily know, but you're an energy economist by trade?
Any big project, typically in the natural resource industry, they're big by definition, but if it's something that you expect to turn around within a day, year or two, I have no idea.
Guys in the back of the room? Beasley, you have any comments on this? Wake people up. Daniel, you could be next, be ready.
I think that they almost through all their savings. And if you're recession,
Okay. Anyone else want to comment? Go ahead.
I'm just saying, I see a lot of federal and state money coming into various entities and projects right now. So whatever's happening with the consumer, I might agree with that last comment. I still think you see a lot of fiscal finally getting appropriated and paid out for the economy. That could be a bad.
Yes.
well, I see on investment, I've seen, some data on, business investment in construction. That, which says that the normally that's the effect on the they can tie to the subsidies for clean energy, chips and things like that. That's actually doing really well, particularly in the last. I agree with most of the vendors I've seen, I can say that just that the excess savings accumulated during the pandemic is kind of, we're maybe about at the end of that. The one good thing for consumers though is that the last 2021 and 2022 prices were going up faster than wages, but that's flipped in the last year. So now people are starting to see their real wages go up.
So I think what I heard you say is the infrastructure spending is what is continuing to support construction. But we know on the flip side, although nationally, I think this is worse in Colorado than nationally, but residential is not in good shape. And I know, Jessica, you want to comment on commercial, industrial? No, you're shaking your head.
The commercial, I'm in commercial real estate, but the commercial construction sort of pipeline, I think is drying up if it's not already, flood trickling on the ground for water, but it's just interest rates have made it so difficult to finance any sort of kind of construction. It just sort of mucks up the entire pro forma, whether or not you're talking about apartment rents or office rents or industrial rents. So it's just that whole supply wheel will be grinding to a halt here. It's not, and that's not good for construction.
So the infrastructure is countering some of that just for the construction companies, but we'll see where we go from there. Okay, good. So employment, again, the check mark or swoosh recovery, if you will, and even the most recent data for June positive, but these are the slowest months that we've seen in 2.5 years. Of course, as you've heard many times on the news, this is maybe welcomed relief to some extent because the Federal Reserve seems to be very data dependent and looking at this data and deciding whether or not they're going to increase interest rates additionally or hold interest rates, pause. We'll come back to a discussion of that in a little bit. And another maybe encouraging sign vis-a-vis the Fed in terms of monetary policy is that the job openings labor turnover survey data now is at a ratio of 1.5 to 1, down fairly dramatically from where it was earlier this year and in last year. So there seems to be supply and demand getting more in balance, if you will, in terms of the overall labor market. So these are things normally, and when I always think more jobs are great because, I'm like pro worker and pro jobs, but in fact, having this a little bit more in balance is ultimately going to lead to monetary policy, maybe a little stabilizing a little bit more. And here you see the actual numbers for household employment. Unemployment rate rose to 3.8%. Underemployment is at 7.1, the larger number. Stable jobless claims, and what we're still continuing to see is seeing an increasing labor force. And importantly, in the most recent month's data, part of the reason the unemployment rate went up to this quote high number of 3.8% is that we saw an increase in labor force participation, which is a really good thing. We've been hoping more people would come into the labor force. And again, we're talking about nationally in this particular data. So you can see that, and the tick up is ever so slight at the end, but you can see the participation rates. And at least when we look at the national number, not close to the labor force participation rate that we were at pre-COVID. We'll see a slide with Colorado later, and Colorado's number is very similar to what it was pre-COVID. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. So thinking about the industry you're in, what are your expectations for the labor situation? Do you think there's still continued shortage? And I'll give you the context here. When we do our confidence surveys, we continue to see this as a response on the confidence surveys. Shortage of qualified or trained workers in our industry. It continues to surface as a constraint. So even though we're seeing a better labor market, I guess you would say, based on the national data, what do you think about this?
Well, I guess the question I would have is, what are more like, or is there a breakdown by demographics of which age groups are being employed? I know I retired at COVID, and so far so good, but I'm just trying to figure what would motivate me to go back in the workforce. I mean, we know how to work. I know how to work. I mean, I still got a half a brain, you know, it hasn't gone away. But you know, there's motivations, I think, in what people want to do. Do you want to do something, or maybe just find somebody who says, I've got a job, oh, I like that. Go to it. So the connection, I think, is still even harder to do this for at least for us mature folks.
Yeah. So we did see people, look, I know I saw Elizabeth wander by. So we did see people, you know, who are not 65 and above and on Social Security exit the workforce, and presumably not collecting people. In 2008, what got them back in the workforce is their housing price plummeted and their retirement account disappeared. So holy smokes, and it took them years to get back in, but they got back in just because the job growth was slow. But we didn't see that this time, right? We saw fiscal stimulus, you have the money, and housing prices were going up, not going down. Until a year and a half ago, stock market was going up and down. So it is an interesting question. What will it take? I will tell you, I have had 2 discussions with people who don't need to re-enter the workforce, who are 55 or so, former students, 55-ish, and they're just tired of sitting around. They just sort of feel they've got energy left, and they're kind of feel like they should be doing something with their energy. So it's an interesting, but I don't know what the motivation is there. Elizabeth, do you have anything to? I'm sure you have a lot to add, but any comment you'd like to add?
So, I mean, with the labor force, one of the things with the older adults, Colorado did see something different than the United States, where we did bounce back a little bit faster, a little bit more than the US did. It could be the types of jobs, the types of careers that people could get back into more easily. Could be a draw for Colorado. But I think there's always a way to eke a little bit more out of the labor force, but it's going to say, what is it? You know, what would it take from all age groups? I mean, whether you're a youngin or mature, male or female. And I don't know if businesses are yet at that point where they realize that things are fundamentally different than they were 5 years ago. And And it's not so much COVID, but COVID is in persistent. It really is this, we have never had this many people aging out of the labor force ever. And it's that boomers that affected K-12, they affected higher ed, they affected the labor force when they entered. So now as they're leaving, this is a totally different story. And so employers just aren't, I don't think they're ready for it yet, or understand the fundamental shift, and that they're gonna have to make some choices to be the employer of choice. And so it could be looking at more part-time or job sharing, looking at more incentives, not from always the financial wage side, but more fun stuff that you could do at work. To try and get people back in, and doing a lot more maybe in-house things. You know, like find a good employee, somebody that wants to show up, work hard, but now you gotta give them the skill set.
Thank you. So again, moving to the next section here, highlighting some of the parts that are, important part of, quote, the recessionary scenario. We continue to see a high increasing level of personal income, and 4.6% year over year. I would highlight, because it's been part of the discussion, if you look at the transfer receipts, and of course, some of that is Medicare and some of that is higher Social Security payments than we had 3 years ago as more people are aging out and retiring. But all that said, we still have this discussion in Washington about the level of transfer payments compared to pre-COVID. That's the green sort of bar. The third bar is the third one down. So you have some of that, but for basic fundamental macro kinds of things, personal income continues to grow and should be able to continue to support additional consumption at some level. This is a slide many of you have seen before from us and from others, showing the income and the bumps of the income from when we saw the transfer payments, showing personal consumption, but highlighting a comment that was made earlier about the excess savings and potentially running out of excess savings. The personal savings rate, I think this past month, was 3.5%. It's raising a lot of red flags in terms of the savings rate, the amount of excess savings, and how long can consumers continue to purchase. And they actually didn't run up debt very much this last month either. So ultimately, is that going to impact sort of the retail sales scenario? And when we look at that, year over year through June, 3.2%, but you can definitely see the last 6 months or so have been much more muted in terms of growth of retail sales and food service sales. So we are starting to see the consumer seemingly pulling back a little bit. Part of that has been attributed to inflation. And on the left-hand side, you can see the National Consumer Price Index, and it's certainly a much more seemingly under control than it's been. All items, core is coming down. And if you look at the right-hand side, this Producer Price Index used to be called the Wholesale Price Index, but it's basically the inputs for a lot of companies. You can see some very promising, until the last month, you can see some very promising movement there in terms of overall PPI for final demand, for non-residential construction inputs, very much a better situation, and even for manufacturing inputs. So if you believe that producer prices are potentially a pipeline or one of the pipelines for consumer price increases, then you're feeling a little bit better about life. But that said, the numbers are still high. And if you look at the picture here, you can see that not only are they high overall, over 3%, and of course the Fed is trying to target 2%, but they're higher in the mountain region and they're higher in Denver, Aurora, Lakewood, which has gotten a ton of airtime. So here we are, and we're saying we're not seeing as much migration to the state, and we're worried about housing affordability and so on. And you can actually see the housing number, the shelter number, was 8.8% year over year. If you look down the Denver, Aurora, Lakewood column. And it is a 44.4% weight in terms of the overall index. So this is a concern, and it is getting better, but until it gets, I think, appreciably better, we're hearing, at least the Fed is saying, that they're not going to lower interest rates and may even consider raising interest rates. And of course, this is panicking a lot of us who are either in interest sensitive industries or are feeling, if we're not in an interest sensitive industry per se, feeling the stress that this is putting the banking system under with these higher interest rates. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that 44%, could you elaborate on that? Is that then,
Well, other people in the room can elaborate better than I can, but it is the total component of housing that, so it's rental equivalent. There's a long description of how they calculate this, but it also includes energy use in the house itself, right?
Yeah,
Other costs in the house
there's a
itself.
bunch of different components, but what you're really saying is that housing is a huge share of what's driving your CPI measure. And you're gonna see that nationally too, have a, different weight. But housing, transportation is gonna be a lot of, energy is gonna be your driver, transportation, and then food and beverage. That's, groceries and also food away from home.
Yeah.
Those are really your three biggest. When you add those those are typically gonna drive about 80% of your CPI each month.
Just
right?
those
what we
three.
got 44 compared to roughly national?
It's about the, it's both Colorado and Denver, area and national, we're gonna be between that 40 to 46% range, something along those lines.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I believe when we say core, you're taking out energy and food.
Food, right?
Right, so housing is still included, housing has even a bigger component when we talk about core.
I have a question. What percentage of property tax increases that we're expecting this year are gonna be to our inflation? They are they a driver of the inflation numbers or?
Oh, who's going to answer this question for me? Yeah. Is this why you left the state? Kate doesn't want to have to answer this, and
Our government answers it the wrong way, really.
yeah. Yes.
I was gonna say on the housing, it's important to keep in mind that order to somewhat rent methodology that you mentioned means that, what they're doing, they are treating the cost of housing, even though most people own homes, I think that homeowners are 55 or 7%. They treat everybody's cost of housing based on the cost of rent. And the way that they calculate it, they're increasing the rent, they kind of gradually eat into the overall inflation number, and then now that rent's just seemingly leveled off, the effects of that are only going to gradually bring the inflation right now. There's a really big kind of quirk of how they do this calculation that really affects those housing.
Yes. I agree with everything you said except the last statement, because I'm not sure we're seeing rents leveling off. They leveled off a little bit. Now they seem to be going in the other direction.
Okay. Well, I mean,
Yeah. So
but to his point, I mean, that component does have like a 6 to 12 month lag in terms
it does.
of what's happened, just because of there's other series that maybe better capture what we think of housing costs, but how the BLS approaches it, yeah, you're gonna see that flag.
So we're going to come back to this in a moment, but this is so all core, all items in core, you can sort of see the overall picture here. You can see energy has gotten quite a bit better year over year. Shelter is getting a little bit better. And certainly we've seen a lot of recovery on the sort of food at home component. These are, again, the big components when we look at overall, the overall inflation rate. So, the question here is, do you expect further improvement in prices, or are we kind of stuck at sort of the 3% range? And I think you're making the case that we are going to see at least some improvement on the shelter part. That's a good start to get to this question. If you look at, and Ron would be better at making this comment than I would, but if you look at the financial markets, they're sort of already pricing in a Fed cut in the first part of next year. So either they think the Fed's getting there, or they think the economy is going to hell in a handbasket and they're going to have to cut rates. I don't know which one of those things is driving the financial markets, but it looks like they're anticipating a cut in rates far earlier than the Fed is suggesting that rates are going to be cut. So does it relate to the inflation rate, or is it relate to the economy? I'll let you comment on that. But is anybody sort of thinking about this? I mean, some of you are in finance, you have to be planning around this. Are you thinking for better, you're going to be in a better environment with inflation as we move ahead, or we have any clear near-term sense that we're getting to 2% inflation?
Just a
Yeah.
quick thought, I think it's gonna be harder to get from like 4 to 2% than from 9 to 4. So I think getting down to that benchmark level, I mean, I know there's been conversations like, should that benchmark level be kind of rethought? The
Right.
prime objective of that is to, keep it low, but that's just kind of my hunch is, I think maybe the easiest part's done and getting it down further to that benchmark level might be a bit of a slog. Just to be cheery.
Yes.
It's into the slide, not a recommendation to the president, but the earlier data on disposable income, the savings rate, what is happening, as we all know, is the resumption of student loans and payments, and I think that further decreasing disposable income for certain parts of the economy, and that's further protecting consumption and drawing down.
So that will help with inflation.
But yeah.
I mean, that's.
Yeah.
That's
Less,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's good. We're coming up on the student loan thing in a minute. So this was the thing. This is 1 year home price appreciation. And if it were based on home prices, you could think that maybe that component of CPI that's housing related, shelter component, would be starting to look better. These are all the MSAs especially for the newbies. These are all the metropolitan statistical areas in the country, and this is 1 year changes in home prices. And of course, these are our Colorado MSAs that are highlighted there. But you can see we're certainly in the bottom half of the country for year-over-year appreciation. And it was worse than this through prior quarter. And then all of a sudden, the second quarter of this year, we seemingly shifted in the other direction. And everybody's telling me when I'm out there that this is just a supply and demand issue. We're not creating a lot of new housing. A lot of people aren't putting their homes on the market. Be that as it may, the 1 quarter price appreciation was positive for all of the MSAs in Colorado except for Pueblo. So if you could put these two things together, this slide would have looked a lot worse before the Q1 numbers. It did look worse. We were showing this slide, and now it looks a little bit better because it has the Q2 numbers included. So through Q1, it was there were more negative MSAs showing up there. So as we look at home price growth, is this sustainable? What are you telling your friends who are asking you this? Is it a good time to buy into the market? Like if you can afford a 7% mortgage, sure, it's a good time to buy in the market. Or you have any sort of thoughts on this before I move on? Yes.
Yeah, when all of this initially started, my recommendation was, it's a really good time to buy in. Some people are priced out, other people understand 7%, which is historically great. But my feeling initially was these rates are going to come down, and that's going to result in some price appreciation. But you're just talking about that. It doesn't feel like these rates are going to come back down. So no, actually,
So in that scenario, people need to they hold on to their house. And that's part of the thing that makes the housing market stable, is that so many of these mortgages were financed at much lower rates. So people aren't leaving their house, but they, at that particular mortgage, but then they don't put it on the market either. So
Doesn't bode well for, building a labor pool. There aren't any homes on the market, nobody's selling.
and
Yeah, I think one change recently from 2008 to now is the percentage of mortgages that are fixed rate versus variable. I heard maybe 85% of mortgages are now fixed. That's a big difference in the past. So this, whatever we have is what we have.
all right, so I'm going to move through some of these things just to give you some data and trying to pay attention to the time and to thank everybody for their input. So you can sort of see the energy. We had a nice adjustment at the end of 2022. We're starting to see a little bit of a move up in 2023. So there is a little bit of energy price inflation in the economy. We have seen a bounce back in wealth, but this was an adjustment from, you can see the dip that occurred after what I consider to be almost exponential growth that occurred when we had all the fiscal stimulus. If you drew a straight line through this now, I think you'd see, doesn't show up on there, does it? Oh, issue it. You'd see that we're probably not all that far off where we would have been on a sort of a more steady incline, but we had that sort of pullback. And of course, some of that was real estate, but part of it was corporate equities and the other assets category, which includes a lot of financial stock market types of assets. So household wealth still strong enough for people to consume with, I guess, is the bottom line. So all of that taking us into the monetary policy sort of comments here quickly. The Fed, of course, doing quantitative tightening, trying to burn off their balance sheet. They were on a relatively nice decline until Silicon Valley, which is the bump up you see there in the tan, when we had a Silicon Valley bank failure, when they had to put more liquidity back out there. But they have continued with their downward movement. I think this is one of the reasons why, going back to your comment over there a moment ago, why you're going to continue to see these higher mortgage rates, a combination of quantitative tightening, federal government issuing more debt and taking on more debt pretty much every week of the year at this point. So we're seeing, a lot of pressure in the financial markets just in terms of picking up all of that debt. And I don't have a far out forecast, or we don't have a far out forecast here, but our mortgage rate, this is just up to date, but our forecasts that we're looking at don't really show this dipping down much below 7% in the next year. So we can argue whether or not that's accurate or not, but they certainly don't see a recovery back down to the 6 or 5 range anytime in the near future. So much tighter, much higher interest rates, much more difficult for the loans. Jessica alluded to this earlier. Everything, when I'm speaking to a lot of financial/banking groups. They sound more scared than Ron New sounds, which is unusual. Not many people are more scared than Ron most of the time. But they're feeling an unbelievable squeeze at this particular point. They're not getting the deposits that they need. And you see all of these banks, the regional banks now offering you 5.5% or more, but you have to leave it in for a block of time. Well, guess what? I can, hit my Schwab button and I can move money in and out at 5.2 on a daily basis, and I'll take the liquidity. So I think it's made it a tough market. And a lot of these bank lenders are definitely, when I talk to these people at meetings, they're saying, we've been told to stop lending, just pull back, hold on, So I think it's a very, very tight market. It's tight for real estate, but I think it's tight in general. It's tight for small business. So this is one of the concerns that's out there. Mortgage debt, household debt. We don't need to talk a lot about this, but the consumer credit debt has been growing at a little bit stronger pace. Not the most recent month, but several of the months before that. That's the sort of rate of growth. Nonetheless, the household debt burden is still at reasonably low rates. This is the amount of income households as a percentage of their personal disposable income that they are spending on paying off their loans. Every one of their loans, credit cards, mortgages, car loans, all of those things. And as was pointed out earlier, there haven't been student loans being included in this. And you can see on the loan delinquency slide, things aren't getting particularly a lot worse, but you can see the dark black line going across the middle here, which is student loans. And since they've been in abeyance, the delinquency rates have gone to almost nothing. And can't expect that that's going to happen in the near future. And studies that have been done on this, there have been a couple of Federal Reserve Bank studies on what did people do with the money, and they bought cars and they bought down payments on houses and they ran up credit card debt. So that's what they used the extra money. Their assessment is for the average student loan holder, this will reduce their disposable personal income for consumption about $134 a month. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge amount of consumption, but for the people who have these loans, it's certainly significant.
It's really age dependent because the people carrying student loans are still going to be, right, those shortly out of school or 10 years, 15 years out.
Yes. So that's part of what was in this analysis. That's why it's not as big an impact. And also, there is going to be, well, at least President Biden has suggested an income adjustment too, in terms of paying back what they have to pay back. So may not be as dramatic as some people thought it was going to be. So one of the financial indicators that a lot of people talk about is the yield curve. The yield curve is 10-year minus 2-year. This is one way to look at it. And it has, we don't need to have a whole discussion of this. It has historically done a pretty good job, but not a perfect job of forecasting recessions. I will say that historically, we've never had an inverted yield curve this long and not had a recession, which a lot of the financial market people are pointing to. That said, I think you could make the argument with fiscal policy and debt floating and a bunch of other things, this may not be the same sort of environment that we've ever seen before. So I think there's a counterpoint on this, but certainly the financial market folks are thinking recession is on the horizon, and you'll see a lot of those firms with very familiar initials forecasting a recession in 2023, even though 2024, even though the Wall Street Journal keeps talking about on the front page about soft landings. Consumer confidence, business confidence, and manufacturing side, not so great. On the services side, better. Small business has been on the rise, but still well below historical norms. So we do see kind of confidence waning. So let me make a couple of comments about Colorado, or what we are seeing in Colorado. And we're talking about our rank amongst other states. And we've slipped down more towards the middle of the pack in the last year. One of the discussion points, I think, is, we led sort of the movement out. Maybe we led on sort of the movement back, particularly on the tech side. There are people in this room who I'm sure will want to debate that. But one thing we can say about COVID is we had an incredibly rapid response in technology. We had to get everybody digitalized. We did all of this stuff. But I have a lot of former students who work in tech consulting for major firms. Some of them are on their third layoff already in terms of tech consulting. So I'm not saying that this was a bad thing, but I think there was an overbuild in that sector because of what happened with COVID, and now there's going back to the norm. So we're sort of seeing that adjustment, and Colorado is participating in that adjustment. It's not just Colorado by any means. Our population has not grown quite as much. We're hopeful that in the out years, and these are courtesy of state demographer sitting over there in the demographer's office, Elizabeth Garner. We're hoping for a little bit stronger growth in terms of where we go in population growth over the next couple of years. Nonetheless, all of that said, when we look at the same number I showed you earlier for the number of available jobs per unemployed person, it was 1.5 nationally. It is 1.5 to 1. It's 2.1 to 1 in Colorado. So it paints a picture of definitely tight labor force in Colorado, tighter than the nation. Our unemployment rate is lower than the nation. And the argument we have been making, rightly or wrongly, I hope rightly, is that we see this more as a supply constraint, is why our employment growth is as low as it is, ranking wise, because we certainly appear to still have the jobs. And we have a very high labor force participation rate. Courtesy of the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, Joe and Ryan, who are here with us, we have put the employment revisions in here that are anticipated. So we'll see, that will certainly make a difference in the rankings in terms of where we are. But, overall, Colorado seems to be moving as a state down more to maybe middle of the pack than it was before. And even with the revisions that have been suggested, which are the red dotted line on the end, we got spoiled for how many months will we in that green area at the top, a top 10 growth state. The yellow area is 10 to 20. So we went a really long time being in the top 20 states in the country for employment growth. And now more recently, we've sort of sunk into, bottom half of the country in terms of where we have in terms of employment growth and employment growth ranking. So what we are doing is, so what we did as a proposal, actually that should say 2024 for the lower box. So 2023, we're at 54,000 jobs. And that was really close to what we forecast going into the year. Early in the year, we thought, oh, maybe we underestimated, and now we're back to really close to where we were with our updates on running our model. At 2024, we're at this point projecting 40,000 jobs as the overall picture. And again, we continue to have total employment at record-setting levels, which you're seeing on the right-hand side, and we're anticipating that to continue in 2024. So we're not painting, I think, a gloomy picture, but with anticipated weaker GDP growth in 2024, some people suggesting maybe even a recession in 2024. We just have a slower growth year in 2024. And again, for the people who don't follow this as closely, 2022 was the largest number of jobs we've ever had in the state in a year. Job growth, that number. So you can sort of see that with the size of the last black bar, but it's in that context. So this is the update from Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, and it may be the last thing I want to talk about today, but I would like to give these gentlemen a chance to talk about what they're seeing for their, if they would like to. I don't know, Joe or Ryan or anybody. Where's Joe? I know he was here. Oh, Joe. Yeah.
What? These numbers here are January 23 through August on versus January 22 through August of 22. When you look at that 8-month period, we have over the same part of the year growth rate of about 2.3, with mining and logging at 5.4. It's finally moved a little bit. It was in the doldrums and under 20,000 for quite some time. Construction at 1.1. I've really seen the effects of interest rates on construction, specifically specialty trade. Manufacturing down just a bit at 0.2%. TTU at 0.8. Information has some small movements that look big percentage wise because of the size of the sector at 1.4 minus. Financial is actually a little better in my revised numbers than it looks like in the official numbers, but it's still minus 2.5. Professional and business, which is the little engine that had better because nothing else does, what was that recession? It's a 2.1. And health is at 3.3, and that just reflects demographic trends usually. Leisure at 5.6, a lot of strength coming from food service there. Other than whatnot at 2.7 and the government at 3.8. Now, for those of you that do not know this yet, we've had some technical issues because we changed QCW computer systems. And it blew us up at my jump off point for benchmark, which is September of last year. And we were off, what was that number, Ryan? About 20, right?
A lot.
Yeah. A lot.
Notable amounts.
Technical term. Right. Exactly. But we were able to convince the BLS to give us 7,600 or so of our error back where we were able to document it properly for them. And so the official series in CES is a little peaked, and you might want to look at our expected revisions to get a little better idea of the overall numbers. And then along with that, we've got the MSA growth rates for that same period of time, and all of these will be available as they put them up on the website for us. But if there's any questions, comments, please ask.
So just for the benefit of the committees quickly, and so I'll shut down and let the committee people talk to each other. So government's strong, but government has had a difficulty hiring the last several years, and all of a sudden we're seeing local government hiring being quite strong. So it's seeming like a better environment for hiring at the government level. We work with several local governments, and they seem to be able to fill jobs a little better. Yeah, go.
Just want to specify, it's really come from local government education. So don't think about like local government, it's really your school districts are finally starting to come back and hire. There's still a huge gap from what it was pre-pandemic, but that's really where that differential is taken up is from the education component. Just wanted to clarify.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Ryan. Leisure, let me just say one second. Go ahead.
Here or not?
They do not.
They do not.
Yeah.
The leisure number, again, you heard restaurants in particular, but that's a nice number. Professional and business services, that's actually probably, even though it's a positive number, it's probably a little weaker than maybe we had hoped for, in terms of where it actually is sitting. So in terms of the overall job growth picture, that's an important sector for the state, and it seems a little bit weaker. But you have more things, fewer things negative than the actual July CES data, right, on this, which is great. Manufacturing still negative, information still negative, and obviously financial activities negative. So we'll hope.
Quick comment on the government numbers. Those really are a function of projected budget. And it's a kind of a lagging thing when you go into a recession, government holds up at the local level for a while, and then when the tax receipts don't show up, they drop. And then they lag on the coming out for the same reason until the money shows up. They're not able to hire them.
All right, so trying to be respectful of time, I am stopping at this point. There's not too many more slides of state stuff, but happy to share the full deck with you. And I did want to give people time. It's 1:10 to chat with each other or see their other committee members, especially the new folks. And thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your participation. It was great. We want this to be a dialogue, and feel free to give feedback to me, to Brian, to Adam, our other colleague who's here, whenever. All right.